Great, recording. I just want to do a quick summary video for week 4. I know I'm kind of behind in the weeks here. I want to talk about the significance of the preacher, and I was really happy to see the analysis that you all did of the relevance of the chapter, the preacher. You might be thinking to yourself, well, what's the connection, Troy? Why is it there? And to some extent, the connection is obviously artificial. I know I'm creating it myself, but put it together myself. And so I really wanted you to see in this chapter was the fact that Ryrie presents the arguments of fact, exactly what you've been looking at for that week in week 4. Presents the text and say, well, it's a myth that Protestants transformed or are solely responsible for transforming British and European culture and then into American culture into its sort of liberal, rational state. What became of the scientific revolution occurred. It's a belief that it occurred through the Protestant Reformation. And sure, he says it's a just so story in there. But mainly he says that because when we look back on history, and he points out, we look back on history, we interpret the Protestant Reformation through our own lens. We interpret it as, well, look at us. We're liberal, rational human beings who, came from this. Our society was built on first the Puritans, who were leaving Britain to Holland to what became the United States, bringing their Protestantism along with them. And all of the settling of besides Maryland, and Pennsylvania was Quaker. Quaker, though, fairly Protestant in its belief, but the Protestant Reformation basically gave us our knowledge of the world in the form of we're going out to seek a new place, have a new future, and we're taking with us this openness. Where if you just compared it to like the idea of the Catholic colonialism, and I am by no means apologizing for any kind of colonialism at all in this statement. The idea, when you think about the Catholics, the Catholics taking over Latin America, it was all done in a very systematic, you're heathens, we're going to murder you, or if you don't believe in our God. Not only that, you really don't get to believe in our God because you don't understand where our God's coming from. You don't speak Latin. You don't recognize our king. Our king is connected to God. Our king is connected to the Pope. And I'm really reducing it here, but the idea, that he's pointing out is we look at the Protestant Reformation as this sort of glorious moment in which suddenly Britain itself and the rest of the continent demonstrated that they were not going to tie themselves down to authoritarian regimes who, stop all sense of critical thinking or, natural investigation, who question anything about the world. And he points out that that's not true in this chapter, mainly that the Protestant, or from his reading of what he gets out of the Protestant Reformation in Britain, is that it was mostly a response to the Catholic heavy-handed, or control everything. Obviously, Henry VIII breaking from the church, creating the C of E's to the Church of England, and naming himself now the head of the Anglican Church. But he points out that Henry wasn't much of a Protestant. He really didn't care for the Protestants denying authoritarianism. And that's really what he wants to point out as well. The Protestants weren't all about liberalism, but they were certainly about denying authoritarianism. And this is really what I wanted you to latch onto when you think about science, magic, and religion. What he's pointing out here is that the Protestant Reformation was just one aspect of this chaotic stew that occurred because of or I should say, like the rise of Protestantism and like its influence on liberalism and rational, deductive thinking and all of that, and the scientific revolution that came on after that. Um, but it, it it wasn't the force. It was more of a, well, we're breaking from the church. All of these people who are already skeptical of the church, meaning the Catholic Church, were then able to scramble for power. And it's this scrambling for power, the scrambling for status, the scrambling for something that made sense, allowed for magic to rise and be part of the conversation. He points out that most of the time when theologians, Protestant theologians, were arguing about magic, they were trying to put it on to the Catholics for creating some sense of like having miracles, transubstantiation, the idea that the Eucharist would become the body of Christ as well as the blood of Christ. You have this whole, the idea of magical thinking it was still a part of the conversation. However, it was a part of the conversation in a negative light. At the same time, though, he points out, well, even this is a myth, that Protestants were certainly willing to accept types of magic that aligned with their beliefs. So when he points out that in many instances that astrology was still considered a regular science. And on top of that, he said, well, magic was, you couldn't deny it because from the way humans viewed the world at that point in time, or at least the British, is that magic was just a regular part of natural sciences. There was natural magic because we didn't understand how things work, so we would process it through the magical frame. But what he's pointing out here is it all starts to sort of bubble to the top and be an acceptable place to grab ideas from. It was certainly acceptable to say, well, we can't use astrology to interpret someone's fate, but we can rely on astrology if it presents to us a position in which we say, well, God gave us these heavens for a reason, and we're able through our rational thought process to deduce what information we can from the stars. We're able to apply it to our lives and bring us some new information. Why else would it be there, right? Why else would we need these stars? Or planets or anything like that, and why else would we have developed these mathematical principles, have this ability to create an astrology? So you see a lot of apologists going through and saying, well, all of the principles of magic that we see here are either, yes, maybe from the devil, and if people are willing to accept the devil, well, then they must understand that they're going to be doomed to hell. That's just a matter of fact. We see that when he analyzes what John Calvin has to say. Well, it's people who are just not accepting that God is the one true God and praying to God when they need to pray to God, and being willing to suffer through the pains of being a human and realizing that salvation comes from God. Is saying, well, if you feel like you want to get some a relief from a pain, or want to find, feel like if you're willing to accept the devil into your life in order to alleviate some issue that's going on or to mediate some conflict, say, well, that's fine. But that's what the devil does. So be with the devil. That's kind of the idea. And you can see, you think about that in American culture a whole lot. That it comes through a ton in representations of our culture. The idea that, well, if people are willing to sacrifice their souls for immediate gratification, well, then let them have it. Or the idea that, and which has totally been lost in our society for the most part, but the sense of having an immoral amount of wealth, right? Originally, and if you ever go back east, the idea to be a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, is the idea that, and this is again totally, I think like anachronistic would be the right word, that originally being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and being a wealthy white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, meant that you were supposed to give back to your community. You were a communitarian. You're supposed to create clubs that help and fund poor houses, or fund initiatives that would help alleviate the poor, feed the hungry. They were really the basis. And if you ever read anything by David Brooks, they were the basis of most of the institutions that arose out, into like our, like departments of agriculture, or departments of health and I want to say, oh man, yeah, health and human services, departments of like housing and urban development, all of those institutions. And I'm not saying this is straight Protestantism, but a lot of it came out of the fact that, originally when we read about the underworld, that the aristocracy in Britain suddenly realized, well, they're immoral. That's why they're in that state. And Protestants saw that as well. No, they're in that state, and if they're willing to suffer through that state of being, that we should give them some sort of, help at all. I've digressed a bit from my original point, but what I really wanted you to point out, this we'll see in this chapter, is that Ryrie he's using the story of Gregory Wisdom to say, well, Gregory Wisdom may look like a criminal to us, and yes, he's certainly defrauded Lord Henry, and he probably defrauded many other people, and but one thing that really complicates the story is the way Ryrie looks at Wisdom. In the end, he's saying, well, he's a guy who was in a situation in which all of a sudden these moral underpinnings of who he is are taken out from under him. He's really he's using magic to get at a profit, or to get at something that he believes to be possible for him, because suddenly in his time there is no overarching value system that is controlling society. It's the idea that being a Protestant and willing to accept like individual salvation, individual repentance, and that like he points out, the act of sin is not the sinner. He's pointing out, well, suddenly there's this idea that you could be absolved of your sin, not by going and saying the prayers, not by giving confession at the church, but by simply asking for it, right? That's a huge power. I mean, that's like magic in itself. You say, well, I'm going to absolve myself by asking God for that power. And that's huge. So if you could do that for yourself and say, well, I can change my life by asking for that change. And he points out that that's exactly what Wisdom sees himself as doing for Lord Henry. He's saying, well, if I kill your wife, you won't step out on her anymore. And if you stop stepping out on her, well, who cares if she's dead? She's going to heaven. But for you, you can find a wife who then you'll be happy with, and you'll stop committing adultery. And if you stop committing adultery, you could end up going to heaven. It's this weird calculus that you see. Well, it makes you think, is Ryrie trying to say that Wisdom is not bad? Is that he isn't a criminal? That he's sort of like this, I don't know, like, I want to say like, somewhat like snake oil salesman to a degree, but he's more like, I don't know what you could, like, I think of him, and I don't, this makes him seem, he's like an anti-hero. He's the Picaro, sort of almost like, and if you guys don't like Star Wars, he's almost like Han Solo, right? He's saying, well, I'm generally I do bad things for bad people, but by doing bad things for bad people, I'm capable of doing good things for good people, or I'm capable of doing good things for bad people. And basically, he's this intermediary who says, well, there's really nothing bad as long as I'm being true to myself. And that's sort of a weird issue that we see. And that's when we go back to Hello Moto. We'll watch the movie next week, Hello Rain. But you almost see Rain as that character, right? Saying, well, if I give the power to the other people in my life, we're able to set other people free. But, the issue is that, well, are you able to control that power? Are you able to be able to be the intermediary who steps in and says, well, this is actually bad. And, Rain tries to in hers. Many people wrote about the power, particularly how Allie steps into the position of being Mother Eve, and the fact that like she's presenting herself as a initially as this change of world, and then as she gets further into the whole cult of personality that she becomes as Mother Eve, she realizes that it's all just the same thing again, which leads to the desire her and or she and Roxy putting together the Great Cataclysm, where the the nuclear bomb goes off at the end of the story, which we have to presume happened all over the world and annihilated most of humankind. But that idea is it the laying waste, and that's you see that rain almost like I'm going to take off my wig and I have to be destroyed. The same like here, the alleys I have to be destroyed. You could see it in it very similar in the Harrison story, where the idea where these people are not getting the help that they want, and a lot of it is, well, it's the power to control those people that's most important in the story, despite the fact that there is something out there to alleviate this pain. Well, because of the disruption that goes on from the barrier, this disruption creates new pockets of power, and these new pockets of power end up with different forms of morality or different forms of health, different forms of living in general. And you find the main character in Mindscape questioning exactly what is her role in this world, when she's expecting, well, aren't all these things supposed to be working this way? But they obviously aren't. And so to some extent, is she even, is she guilty for just leaving them behind? Where you could say, well, Wisdom is less guilty because he actually was trying to provide some sense of salvation for Lord Henry. Anyway, I want to point out this is just an interesting perspective that Ryberry brings into this. The fact that he's saying during this time in Tudor England is that we're looking at a society that is falling into not economic ruin, but social chaos, right? Where suddenly everybody gets to sort of think about who they want to be anew and fresh. And, it gets into that whole, Shakespeare coming out of this, all the world's a stage. And so that you have that sense of performance as being the pinnacle of society. It's what we present and not who we are. And that's really where you see the initiation of modernity. Across the board here, that's really what I want you to say. So where do we get this sense of modernity in our perception of magic and science and religion? In Ryer's perspective, our understanding of magic, science, and religion comes directly from this sort of time period in Tudor England. Yeah, it's obviously gone through permutations, but the way we view magic, science, and religion is through this lens of to this acceptable or this sort of like bubbling mass of possibility, right? And that's it. So it all can work in different ways depending on when you need it. And for the most part, it's what's most profitable. And that's kind of the sad truth about all of it, is that capitalism takes over and wraps all of these types of perspectives into itself, and turns it into a commodity, something to be sold, magic to be sold, religion to be sold, science to be sold. And I wish we could spend some time thinking about it in those terms a little bit further. But I want to leave it there for you to think about. Well, what does that mean to you? That idea that it's everything sort of that the idea is that, what is it? Karl Marx calls it the sacred becomes the profane, or everything that was sacred becomes profane, meaning the idea that everything that we held dear, everything that we valued up until this point is gone, and all that matters, and his meaning of profane is that there is no implicit value in it. It's all imputed, and what's imputed in, if you think about Karl Marx, is the sort of that exchange value, the commodity, the CMC formula of what it means to create capital. And so I'm going to leave you there with that idea and get you thinking about, well, is that important to you? Do you value that? Do you want to understand more about that? Where would you go with that? Thinking about, is that truly what it is, or is this just Troy being some sort of, pinko communist and trying to indoctrinate you into Marxist theory, which I did not directly do, although Federici is a Marxist, but I did not directly do. Thank you, and I'll talk to you later.